Well, hey everybody, welcome to Watercolor Tips and Tricks. This is one of my favorite classes that we share here at Scripture Doodle. My name is April Knight and I'm an artist and I create a lot of resources, and my heart is helping people connect with God in a creative way through art and just equipping people. I love to be here for the novel artist, someone who has an interest in something but wants to help get started. That's sort of our sweet spot. So if that's you, you're in the right place. I'm really excited to share this class with you. We're going to begin by having a look at what is in our kit, if you have the kit with you. So check this out. All right, so in your kit, you have these awesome worksheets that we're going to work through. We're going to use these as a resource the whole time. There's 4 different pages we're going to go through. You have a Ticonderoga pencil. We're just going to do a tiny bit of sketching. You have this micron pen. This is my favorite pen around. We're going to use this at the end after our paint is dry. And then we are going to have, you have an 06 round white brush. I love this brush because there's a lot you can do with it, and you can get fine details and you can use it in a way to get really thick lines. I love that. So then you have some watercolor practice paper, and you have this palette. Hopefully yours is a little bit tidier than mine. This palette is great for beginners. I love teaching with this palette because it has lots of different tones on it. We don't do a ton of color mixing in this class. I have an abstract watercolor fruit and floral class that uses tube watercolors, and we do a little bit more color mixing in that class. So if that's something that interests you, you can check that class out. But this class is great because, you know, your main things we're going to look through and really learn are highlight and shadow and layering colors, and you know how to really use watercolors to your advantage. So that's why we don't do a lot of mixing in this class. This is a great beginner level watercolor. If you get into watercolor and you really want to start like producing work to make prints of or something like that, I suggest a higher quality watercolor. Winsor & Newton is a great brand. You can also get this is by Artist Loft from Michaels. You can also get those in a tube. If you are in the art store, you're going to look in like the paint section where they have acrylics and watercolor. And these tube watercolors are a bit higher end and they're slightly different to work with. But I like them both. And I think it's kind of just a preference thing. I think you can get great colors with both types of watercolors. So that was kind of jumping ahead to the types of watercolors, but you can have tube watercolors or you can have the cakes. Today we're going to be using the cakes. Okay, so the only thing that you're going to need that you don't have in your kit is a little dish of water. Okay, and if you're home and you have two is even better because then you're not going to have to refill your water or shift it. And then you're going to need some masking tape because we are going to tape our watercolor small pages to the chipboard in your kit. So if you don't have chipboard with you, you can use cardboard, or you could use a piece of cardboard. You could even tape it to the surface of your table. It's just to keep the paper from rippling, and we're going to use that Orzian. So if you look here, you have this bigger practice sheet if you have the kit, and that's what we're going to use to practice. This is a 140-pound cold pressed watercolor paper. There are 2 different kinds of watercolor paper that you'll find. For the most part in the art stores, you're going to see a cold pressed water paper. This is the paper that has a lot of texture to it and sort of that characteristic watercolor paper look. This is by Canson. It's the brand I use all the time. Strathmore is great as well. I think the Canson paper is just about the same quality as the Strathmore, and you get a little bit more for your money. So so then you have your big sheet. That's what we're going to be practicing on. And then you have 2 smaller pieces of paper, and those are going to be our final copies. So if you have your chipboard, what I want you to do is I want you to tape around the edges of your 5.5 by 7 watercolor paper, and you can see I have about half of it covered, about a 1/2 inch on one and then a 1/2 inch on paper. So let's go ahead and tape that on there. Now I have one of mine taped on, and I'm going to do the other with you. So grab your masking tape. Feel free to pause if you don't have it and you need to go grab it. Here's my 5.5 by 7 sheet on my chipboard, and you can see I've got it on both sides. So I have one side and another side, and that's kind of what we're going to be working with. So go ahead and pull off that masking tape. If you have painter's tape, you could use painter's tape as well. And with masking tape, one of the things you might want to do is sort of press it on your arm or your shirt or something, and you're going to take a little bit of the sticky off. You know, if you have painter's tape, you won't have to do that, but sometimes if masking tape has a little too much sticky on it, it can pull up the edges of your page. So I always like to take a little bit of the sticky off and press it down gently. I'm going to do that again for the bottom. And as I said, I'm taking a little bit of this sticky off. I would normally do this on my shirt, but it's hard to show that to you on the overhead camera. So now I'm going to do this piece. And again, until you have all 4 of your edges covered. One more for good measure. Okay, so you might be still working on this, and I'm just going to keep chatting while you do. But right now, when you're done this, you should have one of your small pages taped to one side and one of your small pages taped to another side, and we're just going to set that aside for now. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of talk you through a little bit of your brush choices, and well, we already talked brush choices, and I already talked about watercolors, and I already gave you a little intro on paper choices. So those are the 3 things that you know, I recommend. I use all of those things all the time, and they're great beginner level supplies. You know, you can get a mop brush, a thicker mop brush to do washes, which is great. And those are really the only 2 brushes that I use in watercolor. You can see that these bristles are very smooth. They are a synthetic bristle, and that's what you're gonna see when you have this really soft, almost plasticky feel when it's wet. A natural bristle brush is fine. You're gonna get a little bit more texture. They're not usually used with watercolor. When I use acrylics or like impressionist type of paintings, have that lot of thick texture, and that's where those natural bristle brushes, those like horsehair, you can get natural bristle brushes for watercolors. I haven't found one that I like, so that's up to you. You can keep looking, but I want to kind of review a little bit more of these tips on the front page of your worksheet. So let's have a look at those. All right, so we've already talked through these 3 things, and then we're going to talk a little bit about sketching. So when we sketch, the only thing we're going to be sketching today is this little pear. And I'm going to walk you through step-by-step sketching, and then this little cloud scene down here on the bottom. When you are sketching with pencil, it's really important to use light pressure. So you're not going to be pressing down really hard, because you can't really erase pencil underneath watercolor. So the goal is to have a very gentle guide for yourself if the lines that you're capturing you don't feel confident to do right in watercolor. I sketch all of my things ahead of time, almost always. So light pressure is the name of the game when you get to that sketching. Okay, so then layering paint. So layering is a great way to darken the colors you're using. So we have this palette of all these colors, so we may not be layering as much, but what you'll find is when we come to our pear, we do a good bit of layering here to create these shadows and this overlap. Layering is a great way to darken the colors. So when you're layering your paint, one of the things you want to keep track of and make sure of is that you're not over watering your paper. So your paper will get like a sort of, you've probably seen it before, it kind of pills up and has this sort of like, it's like a shirt that is a bad texture and it gets those little pills on it. That's almost what it does. A way to avoid that is to make sure that your base layer is dry completely before you layer more paint on. So you can layer with this same color and darken it. So for example, if I was using this blue with some watercolor, I could layer more on and darken it, but I can only get it so dark. Then my option is to move to a darker tone or mix with another color and layer on from there. So layering the same color will give you some degree of darkening and also moving to a next color. When you are layering, you it's good to know that your colors should be layered from light to dark and from back to front. So background to foreground. So especially if you look on this picture right here, I know it's small on the screen, but when I'm layering on this picture, I'm starting with these background simple colors, this light blue, the lightness of the clouds. We're starting with that wash, and then we're going to continue to layer the darker colors on top of that and the details on top of that. So you're going to start, if you're working on a landscape picture like this watercolor cloud scene, you're going to start with your background with a wash, and then you're going to layer on top of that. You're going to bring your details and your darker colors on top of that, and we're going to practice that together. But that's sort of a tip and sort of something that you can remind yourself. Layer light to dark, start with your light tones and add darkers on top, and then you're going to go from background to foreground. And we're going to work through that in the peach and the pear and the sky as well. Okay, so here's something you probably already knew, but maybe didn't think about watercolors. There is no white in watercolor. Now, you can purchase something called a masking fluid, which can be used to capture your brightest highlights. It's almost like a rubber cement that you would paint on your page before you start any of your color painting. And what it does is it protects the page and keeps it white and sort of seals it. So let's say, for example, if I was doing this pear and I wanted to have a really bright highlight, or really this would be ideal if you were working on a portrait or something and you wanted that highlight white in an eye or some kind of sheen. That's what you could use masking fluid for. You lay that down on your dry paper before you start at all. It's going to protect it. Then once you're done all your painting, you pull up that masking fluid like that rubber cement and you have a white page to work with. We're not going to use that today. I actually don't use that very much, but you can. And if it was something that you were really wanting to make sure you had that bright highlight, that would be masking fluid. That's what you're going to be looking for. Okay, but there is no white in watercolor. So that means the paper behind what we're working on, that absence of color is where we're going to get our highlight. And so that's something to think through as we're creating our pieces, the pear and the background, especially the clouds. We're going to think about how we want to leave some white in order to have that option for a highlight. And that comes with practice, and you get better as you go with that, but that's just a tip to keep in mind. Okay, so we've already taped down our paper, and I just want to note this little tip. This is what I tell my kids when we're watercolor, and it's sort of simple. If I teach classes to kids, I just say water, paint, paper. You're going to first put your brush in the water, and then you're going to bring it to your paint, and then you're going to go back to your paper. You know, water, it's going to lighten your color, and less water, it's going to make it darker. Those are all things we're going to practice here today. My goal really for this class is for you to get a good comfort level with watercolors in general, how to use your brush to your advantage, how to really get a good handle on water to paint ratio, how to layer some things. You're not going to leave this class as a pro, but you are going to leave this class knowing a little bit more about watercolor than you did before and really feeling confident in your being able to just enhance your skills as you go. So let's get some paint on the paper. Okay, have a look at this. This is a little color theory for you. Now you want you to get your big practice page out. So the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue, and these are all colors that cannot be mixed. They come in nature. So if you are a poor artist and you can only afford 3 colors, you're going to buy red and you're going to buy yellow and you're going to buy blue, and you can mix all of those colors together. The secondary colors are the colors that come second. They come when 2 primary colors are mixed, and that is green, violet, and orange, or purple and orange. Okay. Colors that are next to each other on the color wheel are called analogous colors or harmonious colors, and they're next to each other on the color wheel. These colors are great for blending together, and you can kind of see this here. They add tonal variation to your work, and these are colors that if you are drawing or painting something and you're like, let's say you're painting a strawberry and you want a little bit of dimension in that strawberry, the 2 things you're going to think about are highlight and shadow. And in watercolor, that is like pulling out colors to have that white in the background. And then you're going to add, maybe the strawberry has a yellow tip on the bottom. So you're going to add a little bit of that yellow. If you look here, I'm going to add a little bit more of that orange or yellow to kind of change that variation of the red. And the cool thing about this palette we're using is all these colors are already pre-mixed for you. So you don't even have to practice mixing these. If you were using a tube watercolor or you didn't have as many tones, you could definitely mix. And we're gonna do a little mixing on this palette, but you can see these are already kind of established for you on this palette. So those are great for blending well together. The other set of colors are called complementary colors. These are colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel. So red and green, yellow and purple, orange and blue. These colors do not blend well together. If you are creating an abstract piece of watercolor work or especially watercolors, because you have too much water on your brush and it just pulls together and goes everywhere, you know, those complementary colors are definitely important to be able to use, but they're not going to blend well together. So if you are going to use complementary colors in watercolor work, you want to make sure that your base layer or the color you're bringing it right next to is completely dry, so that when you come with that blue right next to the orange or the red next to the green, it's not going to pull together and make a big muddy puddle. Okay, so you can see those right here, the complementary colors. This is just to have as a reminder. And now we're going to practice a little color blending. I have been talking enough, so let's get this paint to our paper. So take your paintbrush and you're going to just kind of get familiar in this water. Dip your brush in your water. We're going to try to color blend any color to the color white. So I'm going to use this red, pinky red over here to try to sort of match this. So as I said before, and as this is something that you're gonna kind of get to learn as muscle memory, the more water you add to a watercolor cake, the lighter your tone is going to get. Right now, these cakes are dry, so we're just trying to get them moving. We're just trying to get them going. So what I want you to do is put your brush in the water, dip it in there, and then I want you to get a good lather on this cake, almost like a bar of soap. You're just kind of getting that pigment moving around on the brush. And I'm doing this quite a bit because I'm trying to pull a lot off because I want this dark, rich color. All right, if I were to just put a little bit of water on there and dab it once, it's not going to have enough on there. So I can tell this pigment is really getting on my brush, and in my mind I'm thinking, I hope I have enough water in here. So I'm going to dab a tiny little bit of water on there to get a little bit more on my cake, just to give me a little more to work with. It's literally like when you are using a bar of soap, and the more water you put on there, you lather it, it's gonna kind of make those bubbles move a little bit more. So that's what we're doing here. All right, so I have a ton on this brush, and I'm gonna start right here and kind of create this wiggle of a line. This does not have to be exact or fancy at all. All right, so now I'm gonna do 2 of these. Let's do 2 of these because we're gonna kind of go about this 2 different ways. When you are blending colors or moving a color from lighter to darker, you have 2 options. One option is to remix each tone as you go and lay it down. The other option is to just clean off your brush completely and pull with just water to blend it across. So that's what I'm going to show you first. So let's try that first. I'm going to rinse my brush out all the way. I'm going to get all the pigment off of that brush. You can see it coming off. And then I'm just going to have plain water on my brush, and I'm going to come down here to this one, and I'm going to try and move some of this color across. You can see I'm sort of pushing it across. You're going to do this as well with me, pushing it across, and I'm pulling from this pigment that's already been established on my paper, and I'm just pulling it across. Do you see how we did that? We didn't add any more color. We did pull it all the way across, and you can see, especially if you squint at that you have this sort of blend dark to light color. And you can see if I was using acrylic paint or oil paint, I would use white to create that flow from dark to light. But with watercolor, we're using water. We're using the back of the page and the pigment on top. We're spreading that across. So the other way to do that is to mix a second tone of the same color. So let's try that for this time. And really you can just kind of see what you prefer. So I'm gonna rinse my brush off, and I'm gonna come back to this watercolor cake. And this time I'm really not pressing down as hard. This is already sort of wet. So I'm just bringing a little bit more water to there. And my goal is to create a tone slightly lighter than this. Now, if I was creating a piece of artwork and the risk was too high if I had the wrong color, I would have always, always, always a scrap of paper with me, and you can work just here on your extra page, a scrap of paper to test the tone of color that I have. So let's do that now and see what we have. All right, so I have what I think is a lighter tone of this color, and I'm gonna put it on this page just to see. And I can tell, yeah, this is a little bit lighter than this initial color. So we're gonna come right next to that, and we're gonna blend a little bit lighter here. Now this is already dried a bit because I've been talking, so you're not getting that smooth tone as much, but you kind of have that safety of a lighter tone. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove a little bit of this. My goal is to remove a little bit of this pigment from my brush by putting it in the water to reach a lighter tone, all right? So let's tap it into the dish, and we're gonna just tap it in there. You can almost see a little bit of that pigment coming off, and I'm gonna pull it on the edge to just get a little bit more of that extra water off. If you have too much water on your brush, you can always dab it on your paper towel, and it's gonna suck up a little bit of that moisture. You don't want all of it. But now I'm pretty sure I have that third tone, and I do. If you see, I have this lighter tone from this pink, so I'm gonna pull that across as my third tone, and then I'm gonna try to get one more color on here. And so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna rinse a lot of that pigment off my brush, dab it on my paper towel, and hope that I have a little bit more on there still, and I have a tiny little bit of light on there. And I'm pulling a little bit from the other side, but you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 different tones that I did about the same this, but it was a different way. So I know I'm going fast, but when you're mixing light from dark to light, your option is adding water to one tone and pulling it across, or remixing your tones on your palette with your tester sheet. And it's actually good to be able to do both. So if that is intriguing to you, you could pause and practice that a little bit, or you can make a note to come back to that as you practice with watercolor. I think it's really great to be able to remix a lighter tone just for practice and that muscle memory. So it's great that I taught you both ways, and now your job, your homework is to spend a little bit of time kind of mixing those color tones. But let's try blending from one color to another. And you see this little note here. We're using harmonious or analogous colors for this part, and we're gonna blend from red to yellow. And our goal is to get this orange tone in the middle, and let's see if we can do it. Now, we're gonna try and blend red to yellow and hope that we don't have to use this orange. But, you know, we do have it with us in case. So let's get a good lather on this red here. We're gonna, same sort of thing, make sure you have enough water on your brush. I'm swooshing it around over and over and over, over and over and over. I'm trying to get this super dark tone. And I might actually not be using the correct red, the same red, but let's try. I might come over here and grab a little bit. Now for the perfectionists in the room, for the neat and tidy people in the room, you just gasped because I moved to the other cake. But the good thing about these is you can wipe these off with a baby wipe so easily and get them just clean as a whistle. So if you are stressed out about that, what you can do is you can have an extra paper plate or something to mix on, and you can take your tones from your cakes to your plate and then mix. So that's another option, but I'm just trying to get a pretty good red. So let's see what we have here. I have a pretty good lather. I'm going to dab in my water one more time to get a little bit more water on and bring it back to my cake and swish around, and let's see what we have. We're going to do the same thing here. We're going to do 2 lines. Whoops. We're going to do 2 lines left to right, and our goal is to, for one side, we're going to try just putting yellow on our brush to pull it across. And then the other one, we're going to try and mix separately. So let's give that a try. I've got some good red. I don't think I use the exact same red, but it's totally fine. This is a really bright, brilliant red. So first try, what we're going to do is we're going to rinse our brush out completely, and we're going to start with yellow. And then what we're actually going to do is we are going to pull them in together. So I'm getting a good lather on this medium yellow right here in the top corner, and I'm going to come over here to the right hand side, and I'm doing this yellow. And you might be like, why are you doing that? But you're probably guessing we're going to pull these together to create an orange. For the next time, we're going to go straight to orange, and we're going to mix separately. But let's see if we can use water to pull these together and get an orange. So now that you have yellow on this side, we're going to rinse out your brush completely, get it all the way clean, and then we're going to take just water And we're gonna try to pull in. Now you can see this red is kind of almost drying, and so is this yellow. Look at that. We're getting this cool little orange color, and that's from pulling in the red and yellow together. Now, what you can see is that you may see that there's sort of this light background, which means your option would be to layer on more orange once it's dry if that was bothersome to you. This is really just a blending exercise, so not a big deal. But there are going to be times when you're creating a piece of artwork and you have two tones that are next to each other and you're going to want them to blend together. And a lot of times I will have a clean brush in the water, rinse it out, and then I'm going to get just water and I'm going to mix those two together. So that's what I was showing you there. So the next thing we're going to try is we are going to blend an orange to yellow, but this time we're going to practice mixing red and yellow off the page on our little mixing sheet set. Now, you could just grab the orange from your palette, which you are allowed to do, but we're trying to just flex our little muscles a little bit in practice, so no one's going to know if you cheat, but I do want you to just sort of practice mixing that red to yellow. So let's try to do that. We have our red here, and we're getting a good little lather on there, and I'm gonna mix it over here, and then I'm gonna rinse my brush out. This is my just mixing to make sure that I have the right tone. And then I'm gonna come to my yellow, and I'm gonna get just yellow lather on there, and I'm gonna bring it to this red, and I'm mixing. This is a way to do it if you don't really feel confident in your color mixing when you're just practicing. This is the type of thing you want to do, and you can see, oh, this is a nice little orange I've gotten. And if you look here, I'm going to move it across the middle, and I have this mid-orange. This really might be a yellow orange, so you can see I'm pulling in more of this red over here to get that mid-orange tone. If your orange is too yellow, you're probably guessing, I just need to add a little bit more red back. And yeah, that's the answer. So red is a bit of a stronger color than yellow. So you usually need a little bit more red. I always like to say 3-to-1 ratio, a little bit more red than yellow. And that red is it's stronger. So, you don't actually need as much of it because it's stronger. But if you're doing 50-50, just know if it's too light, you need to add a little bit more of your darker tone. And if it's too dark, that's a little harder to correct, but you add a little bit more yellow, and you just might need a little bit more because it's not as strong of a color. So we have this orange here, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna blend to our yellow. So rinse your brush out really good, and then we're gonna grab just that yellow from the cake with a good lather. Make sure you have water on there, and then you're just putting it right here, this third mid-tone. Now this is definitely a stark sort of line here. If I wanted to blend this orange and yellow together so you don't really see it, I would rinse my brush out a little bit and come back, and it's mostly dry, and I'm just kind of work this back and forth with just the tip of my brush to blend that yellow and orange together to have a smooth line. You know, when you're working on this and you're not talking so much to instruct, it's a little bit easier to fix that quicker, but it's not really a problem because we're just testing it out. Okay, so to review, when you are blending colors, color to white, you're using the absence of paint. So you're just using a clean brush with water to mix that over to the next color. When you're using color to color, it's good to use harmonious colors. Color to color on the complementary color is not going to go well for you unless you're using a long blend and you're going across from like orange to red to violet and then to blue. You're not going to want to go just orange to blue. Anyway, you get brown in the middle, which is great for shadow when you're doing shadow work, but not great for blending. So when you're doing color to color, your options are to have a red and a yellow and then put water in between to mix it and blend them together. Or the safer route is having red and then mixing an orange off the page, putting it on your page, and then having the yellow. So that's a crash course in color blending and mixing. And now we're going to go to page 3. And we're going to do some practice of our brush technique. And so we're going to just try to get comfortable with our brush and learn a little bit. And we're going to do some thin lines and some thick lines. And then we're going to create this wet on wet wash. And then I'm going to teach you a dry brush technique. And then we're going to do some lifting out for fixing mistakes or creating highlights. And then we're going to move on to our pear and our sky. How is everybody feeling? Are you feeling good? Pause if you need to get a coffee or just take a break. I know sometimes people watch this class in like increments because it is a lot of content and I don't want you feeling overwhelmed. So if you feel like you need a break to come back tomorrow, just feel free to do that. You are the boss of this class. Okay, so let's get a little comfortable with our brush. So you have this round brush. Like I said, this is my favorite brush to use, especially for watercolor if I'm working small. So I have some tips up here. You know, how you hold your brush really makes a difference. You're gonna hold it loosely, kind of like a pencil. And I guess I should have told you this before we got moving, but now you have a little bit of progress. You're not gonna hold it tight up here like a pencil. You're gonna hold it a little farther up the handle of your brush, and you're gonna have loose pressure. You're not gonna be gripping it really, really hard because then you're gonna get shaky hands. Loose pressure, kind of like a pencil. And then to create a thin line with your paintbrush, you're going to use light pressure with just the tip of a brush. So let's practice that now. For this, you can use any color you want. You are for free to decide. I'm gonna go with a purple because I've already used this orange and red. So I'm getting a good lather on my cake. Remember, you add water to get a good lather on that cake, sort of like a bar of soap. The more water you add, it's gonna kind of loosen more of that pigment off of the cake, and you're gonna get a nice rich color. All right, so I have a bunch of paint on my brush. You can see it here, and I'm using just the tip of this paintbrush, and I'm using light pressure, and I'm moving it across my page, and your goal is to get the thinnest line that you can get. And then I'm gonna go again. Now, if you have shaky hands in the room, you can maybe not see this. I am anchoring my hand with my pinky and my wrist. That's a great way to anchor if you have shaky hands, giving yourself something to hold down on. If you're floating in the sky, kind of like this, without a I don't know, an anchor, shaky can come really quick, especially if you're nervous. Like a lot of times when I used to do artwork, I was so nervous and I had these shaky hands, and so just know, anchor your wrist if you want to. Okay, now we're gonna try to get a thick line. If you want a thick line, you're gonna use heavy pressure using the full side of the brush. So let's practice that now. You might need a little water on your brush to loosen that up again. I'm gonna do that. So what I'm doing now is I don't need that anchor as much. I'm pressing down with a heavy pressure, and I'm getting this really thick line, which you can see, which is one of the reasons why I love this brush. And you can do this with other brushes too, but I'm getting a thick line by using heavy pressure and using the whole side of the brush, all the way bristles, all the way up to this metal part. I am pushing down hard and getting that thick line. So that is a great way to use your brush. You're gonna use it for both ways. When I'm making a wash, oftentimes I'm using the side of the brush to kind of do that. And when I'm creating a thin line, I'm changing and I'm using just the tip of that brush with not much pressure to get a thin line. So you can go ahead and practice that now. I hope you were already practicing it with me. And then we're gonna create a little wet on wet wash. And when you're creating the background, a wet on wet wash is a great way to do this. So I'm gonna rinse my brush out. And we do a lot of this in the abstract floral watercolor class. So if this is intriguing to you, that might be a class you want to check out. So when you create a wet on wet brush, you're going to start with a bunch of paint, just water on your brush. And I know this looks orange, but it's going to come out pretty much clear. You might not be able to see this, but I'm going to make a splotch. Oh, good. You can kind of see it. But ideally, yours is clear, just water. And so I'm putting just a bunch of water on this surface. I'm going to get a nice little lather. And then I'm going to come back with my color, and I'm going to use blue, and I'm going to get a good lather on this blue cake right here. And my goal is to have a wet surface and a wet brush, and you're going to see the pigment just sort of puddle and swirl around once you put it on the wash, and it's quite satisfying to watch. So come back here once you have some pigment on your brush, and you're just going to lay it gently on this wash you already have, and you can see how, and you can see even better on your own, how it's sort of pooling around and it just looks like a puddle. Now, if I was trying to create tones, which is what I'm going to show you on this wash, I still have a lot of pigment on my brush, and I know if I keep spreading this around, it's going to just be all blue, but I'm trying to get this lighter blue that's sort of spreading around here. So I'm going to rinse this out, and then I'm going to pull it across, and I'm just sort of spreading it around to enhance that puddling look. Now, the cool thing about when you do a wet on wet wash like this, you can come back in with other tones to set on top of wet, and it really it's still wet, so it's going to sort of spread out around, sort of like that. I think it's called capillary action in science. You're spreading these tones together on wet. Now, if it's all dry, it's not going to work in that same way. But that is how you create a wet on wet wash. So practice that now if you haven't. I'm sorry, I should have told you to practice that as we go. The cool thing about the wet on wet wash is when you're creating it, you're creating this puddle, and really what it does is it sort of keeps the next color that you put in sort of into this playground, almost like these walls. So when you puddle your water and then you put your pigment on top, it's going to spread across, but it's only going to go as far as has already been established for it. So it's not going to go past that puddle barrier because there's no water for it to spread. So you'll see that, and it is like safer than you would think. If you have a wash and it's sort of puddling out, it's not going to go beyond the edge of that water puddle. Whereas you can push it across, obviously, with your brush, but that's kind of a cool thing. I don't know. It's cool to use in abstract art for sure. So, okay. Next, we're going to practice something called dry brush technique. This is a great way to have texture. So we're going to make a little, I'm actually going to use this mid yellow right here. You can tell my water is getting a little dirty. So I'm going to scooch over. Pause and clean your water if you need to. But I'm going to get this middle yellow, and I'm going to put this here. And my goal is to I'm going to let this dry. And the dry brush technique is basically exactly what it sounds. You have a dry brush, and you paint short strokes over top an initial layer of paint to create a sort of texture. Now, this is something that I've used lots of times in acrylic painting, but what it does is you're using this dry brush to kind of pull off different textures. So when you do that, you're going to make sure your brush is almost all the way dry with just a little bit of pigment on it. We're going to do that together once our yellow wash dries, but we are going to do our lifting out practice to fix mistakes first. So let's... this is what you're going to use. Let's get some blue while I'm talking. So what you're going to do, this is something I use all the time. It's for fixing mistakes, but it's also a good way to lift out shadows or lift out highlights on a piece of artwork as well. So I have two, or I'm just going to do one, and we're going to let this sort of dry. And so let's say you had something and you made a mistake on it. So this is, you can see the mistake that I have here. And actually, I wish I had something already dry. Okay, we'll maybe try it while it dries. Let me lift out a mistake just for the sake of time on this pink right here. So let's say I have this color that I accidentally have on my, you can see that mistake, quote unquote, on my red. And so I'm like, oh crap, I made a mistake. So I'm not going to freak out, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure my brush is clean. I see the mistake. My brush is clean and dry. And then I'm going to take my brush, put it in the water, just water, and I'm going to come over top of this purple that I've made a mistake on, and I'm very gently lifting off the pigment, and then I'm going to dry my brush on my paper towel, and I'm pulling it off again, and you can see it's removing the purple mistake, but it's also removing the other color, the undercolor, and that's okay because now we can come back over top, and we'll do that with the blue now that it's ready to go. But then I'm going to replace, oopsie, I think it was this one. Then I'm going to replace my darker tone, and this might take a couple layers to achieve if you're working on a real surface. It might take a couple layers to get back to that same tone that was already there. But let's do that again over here. You can practice now that this one is probably pretty dry. We're going to take an ugly color, something that doesn't blend, and we're going to put a mark on our blue so you can see your mistake. And then you can see it here. We have a clean brush of just water, and we're pulling off that orange or whatever color you chose, and I'm sort of twisting it off, and the bristles are sucking up that ugly color paint. And then I'm going to dry it on my paper towel and rinse it out again, dry again, and then if I have to take another pass to get it out even more, especially if it's a color that doesn't work well, Now you can see this is also going to come in handy if we're trying to create a highlight and we have too much blue on our surface. We can lift out that blue to just create a highlight, but it's really great for fixing mistakes. Now, ideally, when I come back with my blue, I probably would wait for it to dry if I couldn't get what I wanted back right away. So I'm coming back with the blue I've already established. But remember, if you work your paper too much, it might get uphill or just it wouldn't be smooth. So I'm smoothing this out all the way to get back what I lost. Okay, so lifting out, you're putting water, just water on your clean brush, and you're lifting off the surface, just pulling up that yucky color, rinsing your brush again, and then once it dries, coming back with your initial color to sort of fix that mistake. All right, let's try some dry brush technique. All right, so this is yellow, and we're gonna take a similar color, an analogous type of color. So in here I use like a bit of a brown. I think I'm gonna try this golden orange over here. I'm gonna get a good, not too good of a lather. Okay, so really here, just a tiny bit of water mixing on your cake. And you can tell I don't have so much, but I probably still have too much to keep it dry. So what I'm gonna do is, I don't have too much water on my brush, but I'm gonna dab it off on my paper towel anyway, and you can see this is dry. You can tell by looking at it, it hasn't really blended in. But now I know my brush is dry enough, and I'm just gonna sort of create these brush marks, and you can see it doing that. And it really has that dry brush technique. So like if I was drawing a banana or something, or I wanted like a bruise to show or something like that, and I wanted a texture, this dry brush technique is great. It's great if you're working with animals or something like that, and you want to create hair or just a texture. This is a fun way to do it with just watercolor if you don't have anything else to work with. So you can tell right here, my yellow is dry. I've come back with this mostly dry brown, and I'm slowly brushing back and forth on that color to create this dry brush technique. If you are doing this and it's not working, you probably have too much water on your brush. So dry that brush off, get it, and test it on your little tester sheet. Make sure it's not make sure you can kind of see those little white marks behind it. That means it's dry enough. But if it just puddled around, you have too much water, suck some of that water up and try again. And then remind yourself, we're just practicing right now. No pressure. It's all good. Okay. So that's a crash course on that dry brush technique. Something that is important to use. You can use that in acrylics as well. Let's get to the meat of it, okay? We are gonna do our line and wash. So there's two different kinds of watercolors. The kind that I use, like watercolor techniques, well, there's probably more, but the kind that I use almost always is called line and wash. So that's gonna be our pair. We're gonna work on a dry surface. We are gonna blend colors on the paper, and we're gonna use the dry brush technique for texture that we just did. And so you can see I have that dry brush technique down here on the bottom. And then we're gonna focus on creating the highlight with the absence of color. So either lifting it out or just keeping that in mind when we are doing it, all right? So we're gonna sketch first, then we're gonna use our paint, and then we're gonna layer our paint on, and then we're gonna use our line details. All right, so take your trusty pencil, and we're going to, you can have your pair going any way you want, but I'm going to create a sort of a lumpy circle. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I don't know if you can see this. I'm actually going to draw a little darker so you can see, but keep in mind you are using very thin pressure, so only you can see it. So then we're going to have this line, lumpy circle right here. That's the bottom of the pear. What I love about pears is that they are lots of different shapes and colors, sizes. So it's hard to make it wrong. All right, so you're going to have a line, your ground line on the left and right. You can see that. And then we're going to come up here about 1.5 inches, and I'm going to create a smaller lumpy oval circle, kind of like that. Can you see that? Very good. And you're using light pressure, so your goal really here is just to have just enough color on that, or just enough line so that you know where your pear is going to be. Now, when you get comfortable, you may decide to do this without sketching. That's totally fine. If I was doing a practice exercise like this, I probably wouldn't sketch, but anytime I'm doing a lot of details, I'm always sketching to make sure that I have what I need. Okay, so then you're going to put you're just going to connect these lines with some curvy lines that go with it. All right, so then you're going to give yourself a little stem and a little leaf with a curved line up, and then a sort of swoopy S line. And then I'm going to erase my overlap. So overlap is such a powerful tool. I'm erasing what's overlapping. So, you know, when I do these, I'm erasing the lines that aren't going to show. So anytime I'm working on a line and wash, you can erase those as well as we talk. Anytime I do a line and wash, I am almost always creating my lines how I like them. Then I'm coming back with my felt tip pen, and then I'm erasing my pencil lines. Now, you don't have to do that. That is a kind of characteristic of a line and wash. The other option with line and wash is to get your color and your picture exactly how you want it, and then coming back with details with your pen as well, which sometimes I do as well. So the other option is outlining it perfectly in pen and ink, erasing your pencil lines, and then coming back with our color. So let's go ahead and do it that way so that we can see the difference. So then you're going to take your pen and you're going to outline gently with light pressure, and we can come back with more pressure, but you're going to outline gently with light pressure these lines you've already created. And you're going to come around. And remember, we've used our overlap, so we're not doing any guesswork right now. We're literally just, you know, lining what we already have. And then we're not going to put our words on there till the end, but then I'm going to come here as well. Then I can erase my pencil lines. This ink dries almost instantaneously, so you can erase your pencil lines. And this is definitely what I do anytime I'm creating like a detailed scripture doodle, because I want these lines to be good. And then you're almost just filling in the blanks. One of the things you want to consider is where you want your highlight and where you want your shadow. So I don't talk a ton about that in this class, but I'm just going to tell you our shadow is going to be here on the bottom, and our highlight is going to be on the top. All right. So you think about where your light source is coming. Right here, we're going to do our light source coming from this side, so our shadow is going to be over here. Let's get a middle. Let's just get a mid-tone color. Remember, we're layering colors light to dark, not top to bottom, background to foreground. So we're going to get. I'm trying to get this wild pear green. So actually what I'm doing is I'm going to get a good lather on this yellow, and then I'm actually going to come all the way down here to this green and pull a little bit of this green off and come back and mix on this yellow. Remember, if this is stressing you out, you can mix on the side, and that's totally fine as well to make sure you have what you want. I'm getting this mid light green pear color, and I know I've got enough, and I'm going to start a wash. So make sure you have enough water on your brush, and we're going to fill in this mid tone. Okay, if you're watching me, I'm really kind of using my brush to my advantage. I'm using just the edges to fill in what's already there, and I can tell I'm running out of pigment on my brush, so I'm going to come back to my water, and then I'm going to come back to my cake, and I can dab it on my tester to make sure I have the right color, and I do. So let's come back here. We're going to fill this whole pear with this middle of the road yummy light lime green, and we're going to let that dry. And remember, our light source is coming from over here, which is whatever is closest to the light is going to have a highlight, and the things that are darker are going to have a shadow. So we're going to add a little bit of shadow work down here, and we are going to use some similar colors. So we have this light green, so we're going to try and have this darker green down here a little bit, just more green. And if you want, this is sort of like a muddy, more natural color. So I'm going to use a little bit of this gray, if you can see it, with this green, and I'm going to test and see. Okay, so you can see I've got a tone that's a good bit darker than this green, but it's still in the same family because I'm using the yellow and the green that I used in here. So it's important when you're blending to use similar colors that you've already been using if you want it to blend well. All right, so now I'm creating this dark shadow line here on my pear. I'm lifting up my brush to get a thinner line slowly, and you're just following the curve of the pear. And I'm going to see a little bit down here, but not a ton because my shadow's coming over here. And then I'm going to see a little shadow under this stem. And now I can see here that this is kind of a stark blend between, and that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dab my brush in my water, take most of that pigment off, dab it on my paper towel, and then I'm going to do that sort of blending that we did when we used our red and orange, and we're trying to mix two colors to be similar. And I'm coming up around here and I'm trying to blend a middle tone green for these two greens that I've already used, and I'm doing an okay job. So you can see this is kind of getting lighter here. So all you can do is wait for that to dry, come back with that mid-tone and bring that back in here. Make sure you are still using those same colors. All right, and then we're gonna come back, and while this kind of dries, we're gonna do this leaf. So I'm coming to a mid-green here. I don't really know what color pear leaves are, but I could check if I wanted to be accurate. So I'm taking this like grayish tan with this green, mixing it back and forth because I want it to have a little bit of an earthy tone to it. I tested it, and then I'm going to come back here and I'm just filling in the lines. That's the beauty of this line and wash. It kind of takes the guesswork out of when you're painting. So you can see I'm just doing the bottom shadow. Anytime I'm doing the bottom half of this leaf, anytime you're creating your painting, you need to be thinking, where is my highlight going to be? The highlight is going to be closer to the light source. So don't cover your entire leaf in dark green and then be like, dang it, now I don't have a highlight. Now, you're not totally up the creek without a paddle. You can do that lifting out to lift off that green. But best case scenario, you're considering where those highlights are, and you're starting with that middle color, and then you're lifting off the highlights or adding the lighter tone for the highlight, and then you're layering on the dark tone for the shadow. And that's what we're doing here. So I have this mid-tone, and I'm going to rinse my brush out, and I'm just pulling water at this point because I know I have a lot of green here. I'm pulling water to the top of this leaf to create that highlight. And then I'm going to come back with that ugly muddy gray color down here. And if I'm thinking like, oh, I even want that a little darker, I'm going to move to a brown. I'm not going to use black because black is just a little too strong and stark. That's going to be my last case scenario. But I'm going to come around here with this dark, yes, look at that dark little shadow color. And then you can even add some of that to your darkest tone on your pear to have that third level of shadow down here. And you can see, and then you can add it as your ground color, that same color. And then we're going to do a little bit of blending here with this brown and green color. So we're going to rinse our brush off completely, and we're going to pull across those colors. Now, the other option is what? Mixing a middle ground green to make sure you have what you want. And that might be, a better choice long term so that you're not lifting off all those colors you use. I saw like, oh, that was kind of lifting off my green. So if you don't want that look, you can either just pull some over, or you can mix that middle of the road green, which would be somewhere between this green and this gray, and you'd mix it on the side till you get what you want. Make sure you have a little bit of water on there, and I'm going to try to mix that middle ground green between these gray and the green to come across, and I've got it. So I'm going to put this on there as well. Okay, and then we're going to do the stem of our pear, and then we're going to practice a little bit of that dry brush technique. All right, so let's use just the tip of our brush and come up here to do this stem. And then we're going to do that dry brush. I'm coming down this very dark shadow of that leaf, and I might even do a little bit back here. Remember the curve of your fruit itself. Consider what you're drawing and what you're painting to make sure you can follow the curve of what's already happening naturally. All right, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some dry brush sort of strokes for this pear. I'm trying to decide what colors I want to use. Before I use sort of this muddy gray, but this is a slightly different tone. So I'm going to try and come somewhere around here. And I'm just thinking of like those little dots that are on pears. And I'm going to make sure my brush is kind of dry, and I'm going to test it. And you can see I have a dark sort of like army green, which I kind of like, but I can tell there's still too much pigment on my, or too much water on my brush, so I'm dabbing it down here really well till it's almost dry, and then I know, yes, I can see I have this nice little brush stroke. So let's do that. We're going to kind of add that down here, just a little bit of brush stroke, and you might say like, oh, it's going on to not seeing those little brush strokes. That means you have too much water on there. Very light pressure, a little bit of that dry brush technique, and you definitely don't have to do this at all if you don't like it. That's totally fine. I'm adding a little bit of shadow here from the curve of that pear. And then there you have it. So if you are going to add some words on your pear, you definitely don't have to do that, but you want to make sure it's really dry. And then I love to put words on my work. And you can see I've overlapped those letters and just kind of created this little simple abstract-y little fruit. There you go, guys. Okay, so that is like my preferred type of watercolor, that line and wash. It's just what I'm comfortable with. It's just what I love. But now we're gonna try our hand at the wet on wet. So when you're doing wet on wet, it's gonna have a similar feel to what we created before. Things to consider and remember is we are going to layer light to dark, background to foreground. So we're going to sketch a little bit, but this is great for background work. Really, if you were creating a landscape or something, I wouldn't necessarily use wet on wet for the whole thing. I'm going to use wet on wet for the wash of those clouds to get that sort of swirly look. And then I'm still going to come back and add darker details. But this is, for this little picture we have here, there's no felt tip pen, so you're not having that hard line of ink over the top of it. It's just a different style. I think it has a bit of a more soothing, more peaceful feel to it without that dark line. So you'll see that a lot in watercolor. A lot of watercolor doesn't have lines. Lots of that line and wash is used in illustration, that sort of thing. But we're going to create the wet and wet wash to prevent harsh lines. We're going to start with our lightest tones, layering light to dark, and then we're going to use colors directly from the palette to paint on the background, foreground, and to save the little detail parts to the last. So let's get started with a little sketch. Okay, so you have your little paper, and this is sort of a square, but we're going to work on a rectangle, and we're going to do it just like this. And we don't have to worry, or we're not worried about realistic details. We're just here to practice. So you're going to give yourself a bit of a little ground line, the ground line, and then you can see we have a couple of different layers here. We have these mountains. I live in Asheville, so this is a little nod to those Blue Ridge Mountains that we love here. And just simple. You're doing a small little squiggle. I don't know if you can see that, but sorry, I'll come up a little bit more. The Blue Ridge and this ground line. I'm drawing a little heavier so you can see, but you definitely don't have to do that. So then we're going to create these simple little whimsical trees, a slight little trunk, 2 lines for the trunk, and then a little oval, squiggly oval shape here. And then same for this little guy right here. And I want this tree to come over top of the mountain line because this is the foreground. This is the frontmost ground. So you want to have that dimension of that overlapping. So we're going to erase these lines. Now remember, these lines are not going to be able to be erased after the watercolor. That's why that light sketching is so important. So you're just going to keep that in mind. We want that overlap, but we don't want it too dark. So you can go ahead and erase. Even sometimes I will make my lines and I realize they're too dark, and I erase a good bit so that I can still see what was there, but it's not a huge dark harsh line like it was. Okay, so I have my ground line, I have my midground, I have my foreground. So it's like middle, fore, and then the background. So right here, I'm trying to do just a little cloud underline. My goal here for these clouds is to just give myself a little guide, so to speak. So if you can see this, I'm going to work a little heavier so you can see these lines again. But I'm just doing sort of a squiggle line. I have larger parts, larger bumps, smaller bumps. This is sort of a nod to a cumulus cloud. if you are wanting to feel inspired of how exactly to draw your clouds, get on the internet and find a picture of clouds and really work from life. That's a whole nother class to teach, drawing from real life, which I love to do, or drawing from photos. So one of the things you can see I'm sketching and I want to note is we're going to do this wash on the top and the bottom first. This is going to be the last thing we do. But if you see on my little squiggles, I have these marks, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to mark where these darker clouds are coming in. This is going to be the last detail that we create, and because it's the uppermost pigment and it's the darkest. So we're layering light to dark, back to front. All right, so the backmost color is these mountains. So let's start with that, and then we'll do our washes as well. You know what? Let's do our wash, this light wash, because it's the farthest back. Then we'll do this, and we're going to make sure these aren't really blending together. So I love this little blue here. I use it all the time. Oopsie. Make sure your brush is clean. Pause and get new water if you want. We're doing a light. But I just remember we're doing wet on wet, so pause, and you're filling this little space with just water, okay? So remember that ground you give it, that space that you give it, it's not going to move beyond that because it gives it this little playpen. So what you've drawn, you're coming in with your wash of just water, and you may not be able to see this, but you're filling in behind the trees. Don't cover the trees. Just go in between the trees. And if you do cover the trees, it's not a big deal because they're darker, right? So you can cover them up. But if they were lighter, you would be in a pickle. So I'm just covering this with water. I don't even know if you can see it, but we've already put these lines here. Then I'm coming with my light blue over here, and I'm getting a good lather in it. I'm really looking for a light tone here. And I'm going to put this on my wet surface, and I can see I'm following the line of this undercloud, and I can see the water sort of pooling and kind of creating this wash because I already have that white water background. All right. And so then, for this, you have options here. Okay. What I think I'm going to do is maybe just sort of leave this. I like how it's sort of traveling downwards, and my mountain line isn't until right here, but I have this space where I have this wash of water and the blue, but it's kind of doing this little dance of blending, and that is because this was a wet on wet wash. So the blue that I put on top of the water is kind of pooling together now, and that's what you get with the wet on wet wash, which is why it's so cool to do in a background, and that is how we're going to leave that. While we're at it, let's go ahead and do this top wash as well. This up here is sitting behind the clouds. It's going to look about the same on the first level. So we're going to get a clean brush of just water, and we're going to cover this top portion with just our water, as we did before. Just your water across this top portion of the clouds. Remember, you're giving yourself this little playpen. You're creating these walls for your wash that are not going to be penetrated because it's going to keep it where it needs to be. That's the beauty of the wet and wet wash. Let's take this light again. And you can see up here, I sort of have this dark touching this cloud and a dark coming from the sky. So keep that in mind. We're going to come with this lighter blue first, but we're going to come just with the tip of our brush around these clouds. Just a tip, just a little bit to the edge of these clouds. I'm not pulling this all the way. The water is pooling out, the blue is spreading on its own, but I'm not using my brush to pull that all the way down because I want this little white moment up here in the top. All right, so I have this bottom here. Then I'm coming back across to the top of these clouds. And you can see this like yummy loose wash. It's kind of suggesting this idea of these clouds are far away, but I can't see them. But that's why you use this wet and wet wash as your background, because you're kind of building the foundation of your details. Once those are dry, then you're going to fill your details on top. Okay, so let's actually, I keep waiting on this mountain ground, but while this is drying, I want to come up in here and I want to do, but actually with a slightly different color. Let's see. Okay, let's do it with this light blue, but do you see these dark little like grayish tones that have this more dark blue with it. Let's use this. Okay, I do want to add in a different color because I want to be able to see the difference. So I think in my original it's a bit gray, but we're going to go with this mid-tone blue. And right now we're trying to add just a little bit of dimension. If you can see on this page, you have this dark gray green and you have this middle of the road color here. That's what we're going for. So I've taken this light blue and this medium blue, and I'm going to test it to make sure. And we're not really doing a wet on wet right here. We're doing this mid-tone, and we're just sort of moving around a little bit of cloud suggestion. You can see that the uppermost part of the clouds are white, so I'm not doing a ton there, but I'm just trying to create this mid-tone. I'm really kind of twisting my brush around. And this is something that you're going to get comfortable with as you go. Okay, you're not going to be super comfortable with this yet, but you're going to give it a try and grow. All right, so now I see that this is already dry for the most part, this back water wash. So now I have this mid-ground, and I want to create this dark contrast from the background to this cloud. And I'm going to do that. Now, I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is too dark for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of water, and I'm going to spread around this blue around to create this middle of the road. I'm following the suggestion of the clouds, but I'm not going crazy. And you can see I have this, it's a slightly different tone than that blue background, which is good because we want it to have a bit of a contrast. So I'm blending some water, these clouds, making them a little less stark of that darker blue. And you're going to do that with a clean brush and water. It's almost like that lifting out technique where you're just blending as we were blending color to white. So you can see I'm leaving a lot of white here. I'm not adding a ton. Why? Because I want to have that highlight of cloud, right? So you can see they're not the most beautiful clouds I've ever made. You know, if I was doing this and I wanted it to be this like beautiful detailed watercolor, I would absolutely be working from a photo of clouds. So I'd find a photo of clouds that I love, and I would like dissect the highlights and shadows on my own. But what you're learning in this class, the layering, the blending, the wet on wet, the line and wash, those are all things that you're going to use when you move to a higher quality, higher end art project. So just know if you don't love the way your clouds look, it's totally fine. We're just working on layering and blending and getting there so that someday if you want to create those detailed, beautiful clouds, you can. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to go to this, we're going to let this dry, and we're going to move to this dark ground. So I have this dark blue, but I actually want some green. I'm going to move to this blue down here. I also want some green in there because I want the mountains to feel, it's the Blue Ridge, but the Blue Ridge also has, I want to introduce another tone so that when we get down to this green, it's not like, holy moly, so much green. So we're using this dark blue and this greenish, and then I'm even coming down to this brown right here. And I'm going to add a little bit of water. So I've mixed this blue, this green, and down here on this brown, and let's see what color we've got. Okay, I kind of love that. I'm not sure that's the color of a mountain, but I'm going to add a little darker gray. But it's my art and I can do whatever I want. So we are not using a wash right now. We are going wet on dry because I want to make sure these mountains stay put. So I'm using the tip of my brush and I'm following this line I've already created. This is why I love this brush, because you can use the tip of it and it really will get a very thin line. It can get a darker line. You can do a lot with it. So I'm following these lines I've already created, and then I'm coming down here and I'm creating. This is kind of fun because you're literally just filling in like a coloring book. Sort of simple. Now I can tell I'm kind of running out of paint here. So if that's you, you're going to get a little bit of water on your brush, and you can come back to your tester page, or you can remix the blue to the green to the gray to the brown, and then you're going to get a similar color. If it's not dark enough, add more of that gray and brown. And we're going to put these together. That is one of the trickiest things to learn, is how to remix the same color. And just make sure when you do that, you're using the same 3 colors that you were using before. And know that it's going to take a little practice. I don't even think about mixing colors anymore because I really think so much of it is muscle memory, but I paint, you know, all the time. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're mixing. Make sure you're using the same colors. So we're filling in this shape that we've already made. And you can see these layers, like because I'm working a little bit slow and just because of the way this paint is, it's making these little layers. And you can kind of see this texture that's not ideal from the layers of paint. That is just something that, you know, happens when you work slowly. So it's something you can layer on top of, and it's something that you can add details over top of as you go and as you get more, I don't know, better, I guess is the word. All right, so we have this green in background. Now, if I want, I can let that dry and I can add even more detail of color on the mountains, which we might do based on time, but just know you have that flat. What we just laid down was our mid-ground green. We're not going to do any highlights or shadows on the mountains because they're so far away, but if the sun was peeking out or something, we were wanting to create that highlight and shadow, that's where I would have left white and filled in a lighter tone or pulled out some color as well. We may come back and add some darker tones to the bottom of the mountains that wasn't getting the sun, but for now we're just going to stick here. Okay, let's add some green to our ground. So let's see, what green? I feel like I don't have the green I want. So let's try to mix. We're gonna mix this mid green and this yummy golden green, whoopsie, green and golden. I'm looking for army green and golden. And that golden is looking really gross and you guys are stressed, but just know you can use those baby wipes when we're done and they're gonna wipe off perfectly, or you can mix on the side. All right, so I'm looking for this earthy green and I am going to do that on the mid tone of my trees. I'm filling in those colors I've already used. I'm moving my brush along. This really is a simple, whimsical piece of artwork, so it doesn't have to be beautiful. All right, so we're gonna come back. I'm running out of paint, so I'm just gonna pull some water across and see how I do there. You know, you can always just pull water across to get that mid-tone and know that you can come back and add those details, let it dry, and come back and add it. Mostly, I want to be able to come back to these clouds and add that third layer. At this point in the clouds, we've done the wet and wet wash. We've added that middle tone of the blue, and then we're going to come back and add even a darker tone. So we're looking for 3 levels of tone in our highlights and shadows, and that is really going to elevate your designs. But let's do the trunks of these trees, and then we'll move on to that last detail in the clouds. All right, so middle brown here, and I'm actually gonna come back to my green. I want a little bit of that green in there as well because it's in the same family, and I want to have that. I don't know. It's just when you're looking at it, it's like soothing to your eyes because it kind of goes together. You already have that green there. I don't know if that's a technical way to say it, but yeah, I've already used this dark green, and then when I add the brown to it, I'm introducing the brown to it. It's not as stark or sharp. Now I might have some shadow from my trees here, but I might not. Let's do a little shadow. Depending on where your sun is, we don't see the sun because we see the clouds, but that's a nice little detail. All right, rinse your brush out all the way. We're gonna add that third layer of detail to the clouds, and then we're gonna call it a day, and I'm gonna give you a little tips moving forward and just some encouragement as we close out. So we have our wash, we have our mid-ground, and then we have like our darker tone. So here, I really kind of use this dark grayish green, but I really want, I don't see those same colors in this one, so I don't want to do that here. I'm going to try and do just this dark blue here. And let's see, I'm going to test it on here. Yeah, I'm going to do this bright blue. And just know, you know, this is just a happier color palette than this. I don't know why this feels dreary. It could have just been the way it printed on. But ideally, you're having a darker tone as well. So I'm looking at these details, and I have this dark line around the bottom of the clouds, and I'm not covering the whole thing, but I'm using the tip of my brush, and I'm sort of following that. And you can see, look, some parts are thin, some parts are thick. This you are going to practice as you become comfortable with your brush, but I'm just moving it along in sort of an abstract way. You are mostly just creating this idea of clouds. If the more you press down, the thicker your line's going to be. The less you press down, the thinner your line is going to be. So just practice along with that. And, you know, if it doesn't look perfect today, it's totally fine. No big deal at all. When you create those thin, thick, that's sort of how the clouds go, and it adds some fun. So now I can kind of see my pencil lines behind, and I'm coming in with these darker lines on top and the lighter tones. I'm coming in with darker lines on top of my blue, but those lighter tones are still going to stay at the top of the clouds. You can see these dark tones are coming underneath. And actually, I am going to blend some of this. I don't all want it to be this stark, strong, dark cloud look. So I'm going to rinse my brush. I feel like I have enough of this third level of tone, and I have just a clean brush, and I'm just going to pull out and blend some of this blue together. Now, you're risking creating too much blue and making it look wonky, but if you practice, you know, ideally you're going to practice before this, but just know if your brush isn't dry, like clean enough, you're risking blending it too much and kind of losing that third level. But, you know, the more you practice, the better it'll be. So just know if you don't crush it today, you can crush it the next day. The main idea for this is I want you to see that layering is going to get you that detail. All right, I don't know. That looks pretty good. I think my clouds are lopsided, but all good. Okay, I know that was a lot. Listen, my hope is that you feel comfortable with the wet on wet wash. You feel comfortable with the line and wash. And, you know, just take your time. Just start small. Doing that big landscape was almost a lot for this class, but I wanted you to be able to see the variation of layering those colors is how you're going to get that dimension on your tone. The pear was very simple. We really only had those two tones with it, but even so, you're getting to play around with the dry brush technique and the highlight and shadow. I hope you had fun in this class. I hope you learned something. I hope you feel you have a little more under your belt in the area of watercolor. Please refer back to this class as often as you want. You're going to have lifetime access here. So if you want to sharpen your skills as a watercolor artist, just know, come back and practice brush technique one day. Practice that highlight and shadow. Practice layering. Find a photo that you love, something simple, and work from there. So be blessed. I hope you had fun, and be sure to follow along with us on our YouTube channel to see more content and any new resources we have coming along. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.